Picture a successful business leader, and experience says you're most likely to be picturing a white male right about now.
Yeah. And similarly, the realm of business books has been dominated by white males for forever, basically, which is why we find it incredibly refreshing to talk with someone who does not fit that mold and has an unforgettable presence all the same.
Listen in for some practical tips on creating that unforgettable presence for yourself, both in the real world and the virtual world that our businesses are increasingly operating in. Welcome to the Dear White Women podcast, the show that helps white women use their privilege to uproot systemic racism without centering themselves in the process. We are your hosts, Sarah and Misasha.
Okay, so I'm really excited for this conversation today because the very first mention I heard of our guest was from our mutual friend and friend of the podcast, Jerry Wan, who said, this person gave the best presentation I have ever seen in my life. And I was like, hold up. I immediately need to know who is this person who gave the very best presentation that you've ever seen in your life. So could you please introduce yourself for our audience?
Of course. Well, hello, listeners. My name is Lorraine K Lee, and yeah, I'm a friend of Jerry. I had the chance to speak to his community not too long ago and had the chance to talk about how to communicate with confidence on video and how to present virtually. And yeah, got a lot of great feedback. So I love hearing that.
That's awesome. I mean, hello, all of us need to know that. But what I love about your platform is so many layers that go into this idea of the presence in the virtual world. You have a great, incredibly practical book, Unforgettable Presence. Can you tell us a little bit about what made you write the book?
I did not ever envision that I would write a book. It got brought up because a former colleague, sort of jokingly, after I came out with my first LinkedIn Learning course, he was like, "So, when's the book coming out?" And that really planted the seed in my head that, oh, maybe this is something that I can do and that makes sense for me given where my business is going. And so, a publisher reached out to me, Wiley. They asked me, a year later after my colleague had mentioned it to me, have you ever thought about writing a book? And then a few other publishers reached out right after, and I thought, okay, this is the universe telling me, like, even if maybe I don't feel quite ready, because, I'm just a year into my business, but, over a decade of experience in tech, okay, maybe this is the right time. And so, yeah, I'm super excited to have this book out in the world and been getting a lot of positive feedback. And so, yeah, this is definitely a labor of love, but a very cool thing to have, like a tangible item that you can give people and you're like, this is all my knowledge put in one place.
I love that. And I have a question for you because this gift of knowledge all in one reminds me of this idea that, like, we can all be sitting here chugging along, doing our best work with our heads down, but we don't get credit. You don't get recognized for it if other people don't know about the work that we're doing. I feel like there are people who have this conflict between just doing the work and then getting recognized for it or talking about their accomplishment.
To your point, Sarah, like that's the opening story that I share in the book where, I had this wonderful opportunity working at LinkedIn. I was a founding editor there and got to work on really high profile projects, did great work, did what I was told, right? Had great coworkers. They liked me. I liked them. And all these things that you think would be enough to get promoted or enough to be seen as that leader. But as hard as I tried, it was really difficult for me to reach that next level. And I never ended up actually becoming a senior leader at the company. I sort of stayed at that middle management level. And that is because that, yes, hard work is important, doing good work is important, but that's really the foundational piece. Like that's kind of the bare minimum. Like if they're hiring you, like they expect you to do a good job. But okay, now if you want to do extra, if you want to be seen, you want to reach that next level, it requires a lot of different skills that unfortunately we're not really taught in school and taught at the workplace unless we proactively seek it out, or perhaps we have a manager who's kind enough to share that information with us. But it really does take that intentionality, becoming the CEO of your own career, where you're going to be the person who cares the most about your career and about you reaching those goals. And so we need to approach our careers with that proactivity, with that presence, not just in terms of how we are seen, but also where we are seen. And that's how I define presence. And it really, that concept solidified, like after I left LinkedIn, I started thinking about, okay, why was it such a challenge to reach that next level? Okay, I was doing great work, but I wasn't being seen. I wasn't talking about my work. Like people knew me in a certain way, but that's not the way I wanted to be known. So there's just all these different other factors that go into it.
I appreciate all of those layers, right? And I want to add one more layer to that because, and this is personal to me as well. Like I think about when I show up in rooms, right? I show up as who I am, which is, a multi-ethnic woman. And, I come from a cultural upbringing that includes an immigrant father. And like that has definitely influenced how I think about my presence, right, in spaces and how I appear to others as well. So what tensions do you see kind of between cultural upbringing, whatever it is, creating that strong presence? And sort of along the lines of that, like how important is it to talk about culture when you're talking about leadership skills?
Yeah, so I'm Chinese American, so grew up in the US, but my parents are from Hong Kong. And I feel like the way I approached my workplace was influenced by Asian culture and really being more deferential to authority. I still remember when I first joined LinkedIn, it was a few years out of school, and I was just like so nervous and like I was like, well, everyone is so smart, like they're like the leaders, they're older, they've been there a while, and I just was so deferential. They're all very friendly and very nice, but I just didn't feel like I maybe could like express my opinion or had like opinions worth sharing, right? Because I'm like, oh, these are the veterans, they've been here forever. And so things like that I had to unlearn. But I feel like the cultural upbringing of being deferential to authority, being more humble, being more communal versus individualistic, and also like being a woman, right? And like maybe you feel a little bit uncomfortable more than like a man would, like talking about your work, promoting yourself. So I think it is very important to address these things, to acknowledge these things. And that's also why in the book I do address experiences of underrepresented folks, because I mean, that's the reality. Like there are certain challenges and things that we have to be aware of, both for ourselves, but also managers and leaders who are hopefully reading the book as well, and they can be more aware for their teammates.
That makes me think about the systems, about what we see as success and what the molds are that, who do we have to be in order to be seen as a leader? And I want to ask this with one other layer, because as an introvert, for people who don't recharge naturally with other people, people who, like me, who need to recharge by myself, for example, how much are we expected to push ourselves against our nature, our natural forms of leadership, whether it's as a woman, as an Asian person, as an introvert, versus, figuring out how to lead and show up with our authentic presence in our own way?
I love that you asked this question because there is data that I share in the book, and also there are some C-suite leaders who I spoke to. And what we see is people who view, or the traits that we see in leaders, like authenticity is now something that people really value. And so I think at the last chapter of the book, I talk about this data that was in Harvard Business Review, talking about executive presence more specifically, and all the changes in how we view executives from 2012 to 2022. And it's very interesting to see. So they rank people across gravitas, communication, and appearance. And for communication and appearance, authenticity now appears as a word in terms of what people value in their leaders. And I interviewed Linda Tong, who's the CEO of Webflow, and she said like authenticity, that's what got her to her position as CEO. And she's a Asian female leader, CEO. I was so excited to have her in the book. But people want authenticity. They want to see their leaders as they are. And I think it's changing for the better, where we're not expecting our leaders to sort of be that typical like middle-aged, like loud white man, and so we're seeing some transformation, which is good.
Well, that's very helpful. You just described a lot of like the law firm life that I led. And so I am hopeful, and that authenticity and also the space for introverts to be, seen as having this presence is going to be hopefully so important, especially as I think about future generations and how they show up, which is so different than how we were trained to kind of show up in business, especially at the start of careers. So I want to ask maybe a more personal question, because I know that your book is really based on a lot of your own experiences in business, and you share a lot of stories, which I think is so great because it sort of ties what you're saying to your own growth along the way. And I love asking this of other authors, because I think as Sarah and I went through our book writing process, there were parts of our book that we recognized were like really learning moments for us, or like really fundamental sort of tangible things that were really difficult for us in our own lives. Was there something that stands out for you that you wrote about in Unforgettable Presence that was particularly challenging for you to do in your own life?
I think probably the intro story. I think that was maybe the most vulnerable one that I had to share and also the most impactful and maybe, I don't know if scary is the right word, but you're just like really putting yourself out there, reflecting on the challenges that you've had. But what really allowed me to push through is like this story. I feel like so many people have said to me, "Oh, this is something I've experienced too," where you have all this potential inside of you, like, but you're just not really sure how to unlock it. You're not really sure how other people will see it. And for someone who's ambitious, right, and wants to keep growing in your career, that's a very frustrating thing. It was that first story, just because it's just a universal feeling, I think, for a lot of us out there who are really ambitious, want to be seen, and just know what's in us, but are just having a lot of trouble breaking through that and letting other people see us for like the leader that we know we can be.
Well, along those lines, then, let's talk about that book and taking those steps. If you had to distill some of your top tips on creating an unforgettable presence, what would those be? Where do we start?
I think the first three chapters are really foundational in building your foundation. So the first one is around this concept of a career brand, and this applies virtual or in person, but I think it gets lost a little bit more often virtually. And what a career brand is basically a personal brand, which is basically your reputation. And I put this at the start of the book because so many people, I think, when we hear personal brand, we think it's maybe this like slimy thing, or we're just a self promoter, or you're like, a brand is for companies, not for me as a person. But when you think about it as your reputation, or you think of it as your brand is in service of your career, I think it becomes a little bit more palatable and you kind of understand, oh, this actually is an important thing for me to establish, strengthen, be intentional about. So brand is very important. And then the second chapter, I talk about virtual presence. I talk about my framework called the T method, stands for tech, energy, and aesthetics, the three key ingredients you need anytime you get onto a video call and you want to have a strong video presence, because even if we're in person, video is going to be one of the main ways that we continue to communicate. It's not going away. So to be able to show up professionally, leave a strong impression, have people, think positively of you, that can all happen with your video presence, and it can happen in as little as a few milliseconds to a few seconds. So you want to make sure you nail that. And then the third chapter, which I think is a little bit more unusual in career books, is your LinkedIn presence. And again, like that's another one where people are like, LinkedIn, isn't that for jobs? But your LinkedIn presence, I've had so many people say to me before even meeting me, like, wow, you have such a strong LinkedIn presence, and they form an impression of me, and it's a positive one. And that's a very powerful thing, like even before you've talked to someone. And like most people, we go to the LinkedIn first, right, to assess someone's credibility. So all these things I think are really key and a little bit different to think about as we think about presence in this modern day of work.
I personally loved your LinkedIn chapter because I was like, oh, these prompts are really great. Like when I write my next LinkedIn post, like
Yeah, please use.
I'm going to have to reformulate like how I say this into how I say this because it made so much sense. So just to underscore, the practicality and like the practical nature of these books, like your book, this is really great, like tips you can immediately take. So thank you for those.
Yeah, I'm always about the practical tips. So
Love that. So I want to ask you a little bit about, because your book just launched, right? Congratulations, first of all. And now you're in sort of what can be fun or exhausting or a combination of both, which is like the book promotion, the book tour. How has that all been? And I want to ask also sort of a follow-up to that, which is, what have you learned about the book while talking about the book? Because I know it's one thing to write your book, and it's another thing to be talking to people and hear people's interpretation of your book. So love to hear all the thoughts, book tour.
of course, yeah, Sasha. So you like nailed it on the head. It's both exhausting but also fun. And so my book, let's see, we're filming this April 29th. My book launched exactly a week ago. And then I flew to Chicago on Wednesday for various work events. So I was working Wednesday through Saturday. So I didn't really get much time to catch up and sort of process. But yeah, it's been a whirlwind, but really fun. And I feel like the book really has raised my visibility. Just more people are reaching out now. And so that was what other authors told me would happen, but it's kind of nice to see it actually happening and sort of being in the thick of it. And to answer your other question, I think what's been really interesting doing this whole book tour and talking on podcasts and TV and all that is to see what people are pulling out and finding interesting. So I am happy to see that a lot of people are asking me about the themes in the first three chapters of the book because that is the foundational piece. And that's where I feel like I really bring a lot of different expertise and unique expertise. And so that's been great. And then it's been fun to see the frameworks that really resonate. And then I know as well as I start getting more reviews on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all of that, you'll start to hopefully see trends as well. And then you can pull from that and use that for additional marketing materials or pitches or whatever it is.
I love that. We're going to be releasing this episode in May, which is NHPI Heritage Month. So I want to ask, what advice would you give to that younger version of you, right? To the Asian female middle manager, right? Listening to this, thinking like, gosh, like that could be me. Like, what would you tell her?
I would say to try to find a sponsor sooner rather than later. And in the book, I talk about mentors and sponsors. And I think a lot of us, especially as women, are over mentored, under sponsored. And so I think first it's important to understand the nuance between those two things because I didn't when I was starting off my career. So, had a lot of mentors, like people you could turn to, ask for advice, tell me about your career. You learn a lot from them. But a sponsor is someone who is going to say your name when you're not in the room. They're going to be thinking of you for opportunities. They have influence, right? They're going to be opening doors for you. And so those are two very different things. Now, they can be the same person, like a sponsor can also mentor you, but sometimes, or more often than not, I think they're two separate people. And so to find that sponsor and to be observant in your organization and figure out like who are those people that I need to be building relationships with beyond my immediate manager, beyond my immediate team. I think that was something I wish I had done sooner. I think I was just a little bit like more insular and just thinking, okay, this is like my little team and this is, who I need to impress. But you really have to start building those cross-functional relationships and thinking, okay, not just my manager, but my manager's manager and maybe even their manager.
I think about this too because I only really have like law firms as my, base for comparison. But I think about how few, like there weren't people who really looked like me in that leadership role. And I think sometimes people think like, oh, I need to find the person who looks like me who's going to mentor or sponsor me, right? And so sometimes I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, what happens if that's not the case, right? Like what happens if you're looking around for the people who look like you, they're not there, right? So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Misasha, like ideally you find someone who looks like you and has had those experiences. But if not, I mean, there's still going to be people who you can reach out to and find. Like, if I think back honestly to a lot of the mentors in my life or sponsors in my life, like they've been white men who want to though like lift up other voices and who want to support me. And so I'm so appreciative that they did that because their mentorship, their sponsorship has allowed me to get to this point where I'm at now, and they've opened doors for me, opened opportunities, which leads to the next opportunity. So, the best that I can hope for to do is bring someone else up behind me now that I've been able to reach these levels as well. But there are certainly people, ideally, again, like you have that point of connection. If someone looks like you, they probably have some similar lived experiences, but it doesn't have to be someone who looks like you.
I love that. And I so appreciate you saying we don't pull up the ladder behind ourselves. We then pay it forward instead, right? Like we want to live in this continuum of experience and continue to open the door and extend opportunity for those we want to believe in. So I appreciate you adding that point in there too. What else did we not ask that you think that is important to share?
Well, there's a lot of other themes in my book are topics in my book that I think are really impactful. Two that, come to mind, meetings at work and presentations at work and public speaking. And I know they're not always like the sexiest topics or like they're like the nerve-wracking topics where you're like, "Oh, I don't want to public speak." But those two things, because they are just foundational to our workplace, like those two opportunities, if you can lead a meeting well, if you can present a really great presentation, like that is something that because the bar is so low right now in corporate, you just go a little bit above. I mean, obviously, all the readers will go above and beyond, but even if you just go a little bit above, like you're going to impress people. And so those chapters I know are maybe not like the sexiest, but I think they're very important to focus on. And those can be really important drivers for visibility in an organization.
It's cool to be able to think about it in how can I do better? Not assuming that you're going to show up doing it perfectly the first time, but knowing that you're starting somewhere. asking the questions, inquiring, like, what did I like about how that other person led that, meeting, and how can I do this better? I mean, it's continuous improvement and continuous work. So I appreciate that a lot.
Exactly, yeah. And my hope with this book too is because presence, perhaps in the more traditional sense of executive presence, can feel like this really big thing, this thing we have to get perfect, or we have to be at a certain level. And so my hope with the book is it's meant to be very practical and give you the small steps along the way. And confidence is built through those small steps, right? It's not like I'm starting at ground zero and I'm jumping to 100, but let me build the foundation and slowly work my way up while building confidence on the way. And then everything gets stronger and stronger over time. So yeah, to your point, Sarah, like we want to grow into it, ease into it.
I love that. So if people love what they're hearing and want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
You can definitely find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. Lorraine K Lee is what my name is under. And then also my website, unforgettablepresencebook.com, will have more information about the book. So you can go grab it there. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey.
You've just listened to the Dear White Women podcast with your hosts, Sarah and Misasha. Yes, we're on social media, and yes, you can hire us to do talks about our book, but the biggest thing, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter to receive our free materials. Head over to dearwhitewomen.com to get on the list.